When is something going to become real? And when are we actually going to be ready for business value, especially within financial markets? So hoping to give a little bit of background context on the industry today, how DrumG is addressing that, and then the architectural design and implementation of our Titanium network. The Titanium network is an implementation that we use Quorum, specifically on the independent price verification in the OTC market. We'll go into the details of that, but it's an application directly for and built with financial institutions. So who are we? DrumG is an application and network operator and builder. Where we fit in the industry stack is if you look at the most recent Cambridge report that came out on the blockchain benchmarking study. They did one last year, which was fantastic. It was kind of like the industry standard for blockchain. There's protocol layers, a network layer, and application layer. And where DrumG fits is we're not only building and operating that network, but designing and building the applications that rest on top of the network. We are ledger agnostic, although the Titanium network is built only on Quorum. And we do have other applications, as we mentioned here. We have a single underlying platform design that we build out, but we have two applications. And today I'm here to talk about the Titanium network. So in enterprise blockchain, there's been a whole huge wave of hype cycles all the way from 2014 for those early in the game. If you're on the cryptocurrency markets, you've heard this spiel time and time again, that there's a huge hype cycle. It's going to solve everything from world hunger to all of my problems with finance and everything in between. And now in 2019, we're actually hitting a piece where business value is being created by blockchain applications. There are very few players across the board that have been able to break through this glass ceiling of the blockchain layers because these POCs have been more and more intricate and have created this higher and higher barrier to entry into the actual business value. And so especially in financial markets, there's a huge uptake to actually implement these solutions. In blockchain and financial markets today, we still see a huge wave of adoption. There's 300 plus institutions that joined blockchain consortium over the last year and a half. We have 90 central banks engaged in the consortium or other projects, $4.5 billion invested, over 3,000 patents filed. The big thing is two statistics here. 80% of banks expect to be working on blockchain live projects in 2019. And also, over 53% of a recent Deloitte study over the blockchain industry across the board is that it's going to be in their top 5 strategic priorities as a company. So although it's been a new technology and there's been the hype cycle and we've gone through this wave, there's still an increased momentum to get these projects through and for a very good reason. So in 2 minutes to go over quickly the blockchain value proposition again. Before the internet, we've had unilateral communication streams on the digital platform between two counterparties. Now, what we have today is this internet that can flatten the communication layer digitally between multiple counterparties. So that way we can communicate on a faster basis. But this was not enough. In the distributed ledger world, both the processing layer and the perception layer have been flattened so that at every step of a transaction, what I see is what you see. It's established trust through technology. That's the key value proposition technology, for blockchain technology. Now we look at where we're applying the Titanium network. It takes this business conducted digitally model, where essentially you turn these unilateral transactions from a manual process into a digital process. But all we're doing here is doing the exact same process that we've done in the past, just on a faster communication layer. The Titanium network has 3 key pieces that create business value for its users in financial markets: data input and analytics, the truth and validation layer, and the distribution of data. And a large portion of this comes from the implementation of Quorum in this application here. So as I mentioned here, we're going to be focused on consensus pricing. So essentially, if everybody had a secret number that they all wanted to share an insight on what the average of the room was, they didn't want to tell everyone what that was. It's essentially Yahoo Millionaire's problems for those familiar with multi-party computation. And so this is one of the issues that we're going to solve in OTC derivatives today. You also have the automated truth and validation layer, which is what I see, what you see in blockchain, and the low friction distribution, which is that instantaneous communication layer that DLT provides. The use case behind this is in today's market data model, we have a financial institution that sends market data, just in the same way that we send all of our personal data to Facebook and everybody else, directly to a data service. That data service will then sell that data and analysis back to us, but we've given up ownership over our data in that process alone. What that allows for is those data services, like the Bloombergs of the world, the IBCs, the Mauritius market totems, a lot of these huge market players, they'll take that data and they have these aggregated statistics, it's really valuable data, and they go off and resell it. This is the same thing in Facebook. We give our data to a service that goes and exploits our sensitive data. This is happening at the financial institution layer, and this kind of data is very, very sensitive to these institutions. So what they're able to do is monetize on that future return, but that data does not, or that monetization does not ever reach the financial institution. So inside data markets today, again, a few key statistics of why we're doing this in the first place, why we applied Quorum to financial markets. A statistic by the New York Stock Exchange recently that the data flow between the financial institutions receiving data from the New York Stock Exchange, so prices went increased from 967 to 2,960%, just in the same difference between 2018 compared to 2010 data. It's the same exact data, and it's increased 2,000% across this time frame. Despite the cost increase, this is a significant increase for firms, and as well as this is just basic market coverage. It's just the basic analytics that these firms need, including firms like 2 Sigma, for example. These hedge funds, these financial institutions, they need this financial data in order to mark their books correctly, in order to make sure that they're pricing and doing their trading activities, whatever it might be, on a standardized basis. And so this allows for this exploitation of the data. And so we want to collapse that flow, return the data ownership back to the user, and actually provide business value for a specific application. And this is that application. As I mentioned before, in Yao's Millionaire Problem, we all had a secret number, and we all wanted to figure out what the consensus of the room was on our numbers, but we didn't want to share it with one another. How do we do that? So what happens today in the over-the-counter market, the over-the-counter derivatives market, when you trade on the over-the-counter, that means non-off exchanges, that means non-standardized results. If I wanted to find the price of Apple stock, I would go to Google and I'd find it. I'd Google up and I'd say, what's the price of Apple stock today? And I'd find its price. If you're trading 3-year swaptions that are worth potentially billions of dollars with multiple counterparties, they don't have the same easy reference rate. It's kind of a backwards dilemma in that these huge transactions, the OTC market makes up approximately a $1.2 quadrillion market. It's 5 times the global money supply. And there's no direct way to check your OTC prices and make sure that you're actually standardized against the market. So in 2002, 2004 range, these services came about that said, okay, have all the banks send me the data, we'll aggregate it, and we'll send it back to you. What they did then is they charged upwards of $15 million for that service, and then they took all that data and plugged it into all these other models. Again, exploiting sensitive data and then reselling it to the rest of the marketplace. And so some of the cool network. We literally had one of the top roundtable. We presented this concept, slammed his fists on the table, and said, "We want our data back." That was a striking moment for us, because this is not just happening in the retail sector. This is not just happening on a personal individual basis. These are at the largest institutions in the world, and they do not know how to retain their data ownership. So finally, this is the titanium data model. Financial institutions, at every step of the way, they have full control and ownership of their sensitive data. We cryptographically secure the data, anonymize it, and distribute it using Quorum and some other techniques we'll go into to the Titanium network. It's sent into directly their cloud cell, which is hosted on Azure. It's a multi-tenant cloud service that allows for full isolation among all the other nodes of the network. So your data is secured in an owned place by your financial institution. Now that cloud cell is part of a multi-bank network where DrumG is just one of those nodes on the network. We provide the consensus analytics, those pluggable services, those 1, 2, 3 that I mentioned earlier of Titanium. That all happens at the DrumG node level. It still gets shared and cryptographically secured and anonymized along all the rest of the banks. Then that data, the insights, the analytics, and the ownership and control, which they still maintain, are all sent back to the financial institutions participating. And so that was the service offering that we presented to the banks that got really excited about this model, because although OTC consensus services are the first application, it allows for a whole stream of evolution how that progresses. So the service today, just to finish on the commercial side of things, is that we do offer the OTC price consensus services, multi-asset coverage, great outlier detections, and analytics. It's all the things that they would normally receive in the analytics services today. The only difference, primarily, other than all the other commercial benefits, is that you're going to be able to maintain and retain ownership of your data and control every step of the way. So as I mentioned here, we use both cloud and DLT into our architecture. What happens in the normal data flow is that the data will originate at the bank. The OTC prices will originate at any financial institution. It gets sent into the Azure cell, Azure cloud cell. And again, this is cell isolation, tenant isolation among all the other nodes on the network. So that ownership is maintained and completely isolated. It's not shared, it's not the same network. It's completely separated from all the other nodes. And we use Quorum in the distribution layer that will encrypt the data and send it into the network here. Today, our solution involves a decryption at the calculation node level for the DrumG's node. It But our evolution, we want to essentially abstract even ourselves out of the process. So when we receive the data, it's decrypted. We don't know if we see a price for a instrument. We don't know if it's UBS, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, whoever it might be. But we're able to aggregate that on an anonymized basis, figure out the pricing and the analytics, and then send that back through the distribution relative throughout the Quorum, essentially. And on that network, since Quorum is one of the most involved private permission blockchains in space right now, you have 3 different private transaction layers that you're able to achieve, which we'll go into a little bit later. But each of those transaction layers would allow for either the DrumG node to decrypt it, the transacting counterparty to decrypt it, or nobody to decrypt it. And those nobody to decrypt it would be like if 2 individuals had a transaction and everybody else was not able to see that. So that would be the individual pricing on that basis. So that is the architecture. And now what I want to do is run through. I'll stop there. I'm happy to keep this as an open discussion. If anyone has questions in the architectural design, I'd like to go into a live demo about how this works in a 5-node network. Anybody have questions?
I'm so just trying to understand. I mean, so DrumG is still a centralized node that gets to see the data and clear, or are you using enclaves or are you using crypto to do the process?
Yes, so the data is encrypted on the inflow, so it's through the AES 256 encryption with public-private key encryption as well. And when it gets sent into the DrumG node itself, it's decrypted and then sent into the calculation node in which those prices are then aggregated and then rewritten back on the private smart contracts that was originated and then sent back to the banks. So it's like a 3-step process. Then the prices are separated into a different category, and they're sent into the DrumG calculation node. When the DrumG calculation node receives it, they'll only see the prices for the specific instrument. They won't see who it was sent from. And then they're able to aggregate the prices in that calculation node and rewrite them back onto each of those instrument names. And so essentially what that does, it allows for DrumG to be abstracted from seeing that JP Morgan submitted this price for this instrument. However, JP Morgan will still receive the insights and analytics on all the prices that they sent them.
You can't do de-anonymization analysis on the data that they're getting?
An anonymization, sorry?
De-anonymization analysis on the data that they're getting?
An anonymization?
There's that worry, and there's also the worry you're still a centralized partner in this
Absolutely.
story. So you can start charging the high prices.
Day one, you're absolutely right. Day one, 100%. Day one, 100%. We would able to be a centralized party. You could look at us like that. However, in this model, what we've done is, since we've introduced the anonymization, since we've done this, we obviously did this on a contractual basis to make sure that all the ownership was returned back to each of the different banks, number one, which is a huge change from all the other market data providers. But second, we've set it up for an evolution to actually abstract ourselves completely. So the banks are actually more comfortable and they're not actually okay with a fully decentralized model on day one, because that removes the responsibility and the chokehold for if something goes wrong in an enterprise solution, what happens. So the banks are not ready yet when that happens, which is kind of funny. You'll see this in the blockchain industry. A lot of the applications, they don't have the maturity yet that a lot of these other data models do. And so if you said to them and say, we're going to do a fully decentralized model, and JP Morgan, Goldman, everybody give us your data, where it's going to be totally separated from each other. It's not something that they're actually going to like at day one. Because they need responsibility, they need the processings, and they need to figure out chain of command where their data sets go. So that's why they love the model of day one. You can see it, they own it contractually, and DrumG provides the analytics. And that evolves over time by removing ourselves and creating a secure enclave for all the different counterparties. And that's where you would introduce multi-party computation, for example.
I assume that the interface between the bank and the bank provides a set of APIs.
Yes, full API suite and a web platform UI, which you'll see in a minute.
And you haven't mentioned open source. Is it, or do you intend to?
To open source? No. Private software services in that regards, what we might do in the future state is something that we've talked about is our platform vision is to be able to create an agnostic data engine for multiple ledgers, and we might be able to do something in the future in that regard, but that's a whole other conversation for those private software.
And all those nodes are part of it.
Primarily because they don't want to host them right now. They would prefer a network operator in that capacity for a number of different reasons. And so primarily from a security and analysis standpoint, they're not ready to integrate on-premise blockchain. That's simple right now. We're not at a mature state in the industry. We're in on-premise integration with full implementation for an actual use case with sensitive data. Financial markets aren't ready.
So you guys are just clients of your node.
Yes, exactly. And they all have full ownership over their cell in the Azure network. So their cloud cell is fully separated. So if you were JP Morgan, you would have your own cloud cell fully separated on a totally different network than all the other banks, for example. That's where your local storage is. That's where their data is processed. It would never infiltrate, never mix with anybody else's data in the network. And then the DLT node sits in that cloud cell and pulls it into the DLT network for analysis and parses it like I mentioned earlier.
So the way you have it with one node, what's the situation in terms of redundancy? I mean, is there ability to have multiple nodes manage DG nodes?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah, it very well could be. In the redundancy standpoint, all the data is obviously backed up on obviously the block storage on each of the Azure stuff. And if in any other scenarios of failures of any of the connectivities to the DrumG node, for example, we would be able to either rerun the calculation cycle back through, or we would have the right backups to run the calculation again. And that's also stored not only on the blockchain for full try to be able to pull the transactions and decrypt them, but also in the local storage of each of the process. So with that, let's show a quick demo of this. This is in a 5-node network. We're going to show 2 banks submitting prices in our FX vanillas. The big thing with this, OTC consensus services today, some of these institutions, they have 400 to 500 analysts doing this over a month-long period. And what you're about to see is that process essentially done in 10 seconds, 15 seconds over the course of the network. So what we see here are 2 bank nodes. This is the web platform UI. This is an old version of it, so forgive the bad color scheme. You have the top node on the left, the top node on the right, which are 2 bank nodes, our DrumG calculation node in the middle. We have Quorum Maker running in the middle here, so we see the actual block counts increasing with each of the transactions that are being written to Quorum. We just show the logs, the outputs on the bottom. We just show the logs, the outputs on the bottom, just to show you that this isn't some mock-up and that live code is actually running on the back end. There we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to submit data from the first bank here. And what we're going to do is submit an FX option spreadsheet. In institutional finance, they have databases of all their options pricing. This is just a simple 17-row example where you have a client price for FX, vanilla options, and forwards for different products at different maturities, and those are all the difference of the instruments that are being sent in. You see this, as soon as it gets sent in, you see the actual block counts updating, you see the DrumG node and all the Quorum network updating with the private transaction hashes. You're going to see that from not only a private basis of the private transactions between the bank node and the DrumG node, but you're going to see it as a hash-only transaction for nodes not privy to that network on that blockchain. So as soon as we were able to see this, we've already pre-uploaded it for the demo into Bank 2. This is on an automated basis today. We're going to do this in the actual finance, but we actually calculate the DrumG node. That's a secure enclave calculation right there, where we actually press it. Calculations and analytics are applied to that data. Data is parsed out. As soon as it's being written, all those new analytics are being written. Those are new blocks. Each of those rows are being written onto blocks onto the Quorum network. You'll see continuously the block counts updating and the private transactions updating at each step. So this process we ran this with about 200 rows of data. And we also do this on a manual basis for the demo. Again, this is fully automated for production. This took just about 60 seconds to calculate, and you're able to download what is now, what we talked about earlier, that secret price that essentially if everybody had in the room, you're able to see on that same spreadsheet that you sent in, the last column was your client price. And now today, what we offer is a whole suite of analytics past that. For this example, we just show the output as being for both of these banks on totally separate networks. They see here same price consensus, which is the consensus of the entire 5-bank network, and they're able to see their individual price that was submitted for it. So in actuality in production, what you see is a whole 15, 20 rows of statistics after this. You can see where you are, if you're an outlier in the data set. There's a lot of financial analysis going into that. But on the bottom basis of what we're achieving with Quorum is that a private transaction from each of these banks went through to the network. Analytics and consensus was sent back, and no data was shared between individual banks. And even to the DrumG node, the data that was sent in was fully anonymized. And so that's the output of that 5-bank network example. And today we have this running in production with a 10-bank node network. We're running tens of thousands of data rows on this line on a daily basis into the system. So we kind of increase with scale as time goes on.
Do you also report back the sample size you did the calculations on for a specific instrument?
The sample size?
Difference whether it was 3 prices or 3,000 prices.
Yeah, absolutely. So in FX, we're starting with the FX asset class. FX vanilla submission sets are on average about 44,000 rows in size. Something we test and our fully have capabilities to and which you can put in there. So 44,000 rows for a 10-bank network. We're looking at about just under 500,000 rows of data being processed on one. That's for right now, and that we should expect to expand over time as well.
So you're basically creating like a offer or curve based on the offer rates that you know what the offer is. You get a mid-market, basic market, and from that you are aggregating prices that everyone needs to be fair price.
Exactly. So for example, my trade, I used to be a swap trader at Citizen or not. I would price swaptions out in the market. I would do the US dollar, ruble, cross. Allows for the 3 levels of privacy between all the transactions, as I mentioned earlier. This is a public transaction, which is available to everybody on the private network to encrypt. The private transaction between 2 counterparties, where you need to have the asymmetric key validation. Well, for this use case, one obviously the enterprise viability. Support the operations, the boring stuff that you don't actually focus on. Quorum that actually is developing that on a very strong basis for us, and especially as we go into production with financial institutions. Second is at the privacy levels. So there's a number of different blockchain solutions in the world out there, and some, you would not even want a transaction to be published on the network, because that could send some information out. But for us, that wasn't a direct concern, and there were differences of privacy level between that Quorum provided for us. It was actually fit directly for our use case. So. And yeah, so what we want to finish on is just the commercial viability of this. When you talk about these blockchain projects and you implement them, it's all about who's going to pay for it at the end of the day. How much are you going to be able to implement it? How fast is this going to go? And what's the actual business case that this is solving? For Titanium, the data ownership concept is a completely new concept in the market data model. It doesn't exist today, and we're achieving it contractually, and we're looking to evolve it over time with the implementation of the technology. The second is in this model, if you want to challenge the consensus. If you thought, my price is better than that. You're 3 standard deviations away from what I think the consensus should be. Today it's a phone call and an email. We have a full market evidence process automatic, so you can actually update, you can show broker quotes, you can show spreadsheets automatically, and then have the network democratically vote on it on a certain period of time. So that way if there's any amendments to that consensus price, it gets sent back instantaneously. Order of magnitude cost reduction, if you're paying for this, it's significantly cheaper than what we talked about earlier. Automated, fully transparent service, and obviously the operational efficiency that DLT involves. There is this concept of an agnostic data engine that we integrate. So for example, in today's market, for a lot of these data processes, when you put in prices, they need to be specific maturities. They need to be specific currencies and specific formats. And we've created a model where any of these inputs would essentially be accepted as long as there's other participants in the network submitting them. So if there's a new currency that I want to submit for, if I want to submit for USD BTC, and nobody else in the network is right now, we'll come back obviously with zero consensus. But if there were other participants, it's a plug-and-play model into Titanium. So that allows asset classes to grow organically, that allows different instruments to grow organically, different offerings and consensus, allowing more and more transparency into an extremely opaque, extremely large market. And finally, where we are today, we have 10 network founding banks that are signed on board to this network, aiming for live production in Q1 of 2020, by January. Between these 10 banks, we cover about 41% of the global OTC activity. That's 41% of that $1.2 trillion of activity in the OTC amounts. And then finally, in those 10 network banks, that accounts for about 53% of the daily FX market as well. With these type of systems, for transparent systems and responsible systems, we hope that with blockchain and a number of these other technologies, we can create a more transparent and automated marketplace. So with that, I'll finish and thank you guys for your time and happy to answer any questions you have.
I got a question. You mentioned the mechanism for challenging the consensus. Is there also perhaps like a regulator role or something to audit the submissions? Because I could imagine a scenario where like 3 out of 5 members decide to collude and overinflate the prices. So you gotta hold people accountable.
That's a really good point. So there's 2 points of that: regulation, involvement, and collusion. So collusion, based on the information that we send out, if we sent out every statistic across the book, for example, you'd be able to back into the data, reconstruct the curve, and figure out what everybody's price points were. If you want to be able to extract that to a certain point, there's only a certain amount of statistics that are allowed to do that. So the only way for collusion would be the good old-fashioned, I'm going to go send you my prices. It's from a technology standpoint and backing out of it from Titanium, it's not possible. And the second piece is the regulator point of view. You're absolutely right. This whole independent price verification in the OTC market, this is all about, it was all regulator driven, but they didn't handle it. They said, wait a minute, guys, we need transparency in the OTC market. We need consensus. We need somebody to say what the market standard is for these prices. And so a service back in the day, in 2002, 2003, Totem became a service. Totem had his offering that just said, thanks, give me all your stuff, we'll aggregate it, we'll charge you a crazy amount of money. So that was a model initially. The regulators kind of gave them their blessing in the early days, and then they went out to all the banks and it became a market standard. Now all the banks are saying, wait a minute, giving this data to now a massive data conglomerate. It's taking our data, integrating it, and plugging and playing in every other valuation model, every other analysis model, every other curve building model, anything that you want. Our data is getting exploited and they're making the money from it. So that's how it kind of came about. So from our perspective, we're going to be working with the regulators, but there's no direct regulator sign off needed. However, with the Quorum network, they could plug in a regulator node, and they could oversight it directly in the future state, if that was what they would want to do. That would be a totally new model for everyone. So again, with these blockchain projects, you want to start from like a day one viability. We actually do this, and there's actually providing business value. And once you're in that wedge, then you get to kind of evolve over time. That's a really good idea to get them involved. Any other questions?
All right, so you talked about moving towards open system. Can you kind of explain that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wish I had the slides to show it essentially. If you looked at a model diagram, you would essentially see all the banks submitting their data to our calculation node, and then we would provide the anonymous analytics on it and send it back. What we're going to evolve to, and this is really dependent on the technology. You know, some of the banks even said only 1 or 2 of them had a problem with that. They're like, wait a minute, why do you even have a DrumG calculation on the network? First and foremost, most of the banks need that model. But second off, multi-party computation technology is not there yet. It's not enterprise ready. It's not in a state where you would actually be able to provide truly anonymous analytics, where I wouldn't even need to send my data out to get analytics on it. But as soon as it is ready, which is something we actively monitor, the most up-to-date research and everything that we're looking for, is that we would create a secure enclave that the nodes would actually plug into at first step. And then that secure enclave would be replicated across the cloud sites. So that way they're all receiving the same analytical model with transparent methodology. The data actually never needs to leave the cloud site. And then as soon as you evolve over time and the banks are actually ready to implement blockchain under an on-premise solution, that cloud cell can then become pushed into their banks themselves. So that way, in the future state between that evolution, data would never have to leave the bank, and you would still receive all those analytics. And that's kind of the future goal for true multi-party computation.
Data come in, their data go in, calculation can be done in the enclave.
Yes,
Type of data will be in there.
spot on. Any other questions? I'll be around if anybody has anything else, but thank you guys again.
All right. Thank you, gang.